Now, for those who are just growing up, who may not have idea, there's been history of coup since the 1950s.
Yes.
And now there's been several hundreds, over 100 of these in Africa. And that there are attempts, there are successful coups. So this is not a new thing in Africa. But from the history, the brief history we just outlined them, why do you think that this was in the 50s? We didn't have this level of civilization. We didn't have this level of awareness or globalization. The globe hasn't grown to the point where we now have everything we have today.
Yeah.
So why do you think that with the growth that the earth has experienced, we're talking about coups in Africa today?
You see, well, we can look at it as an aberration.
Okay.
But before we do that, let us find out what is the foundation of African politics.
All right.
It is from the foundation that we know what is responsible for this continuation of coup, even in modern times, even in contemporary coup. Yeah, you raised this issue of with all the modernization, with all the improvement, with all the progress, even in terms of the progress in putting up democracy.
Yeah.
How come Africa is retarding? Africa is completely, in fact, I cannot even say that there's a democratic system in Africa, because the foundation that gave rise to African states, the problem is with states, the formation of African states. They were all founded on a very, very wrong foundation. That's why we can say that when the foundation is wrong, what can the righteous do? The foundation that gave rise to modern states in Nigeria were all colonial. They were all colonial establishments.
Can you say that again? The foundation that gave rise
to Nigerian states, the current Nigerian
states
as we have it.
Countries?
No, the whole of Africa. I mean, the foundations that gave rise to Africa is based on what a French scholar called René Dumont. He called it False Start in Africa. That is the title of a book. False Start in Africa. And after that, so many other scholars have also established that the foundation of African states were faulty. Alex Thompson did the same thing. A lot of Nigerian scholars, including Professor Claude Ake, Eme Ekekwe, have addressed this problem that the moment the foundation is wrong, then the state cannot hold. And Nigeria is one of those examples. All the African states were founded as colonial imposition.
Can you explain that, Prof?
The origin of the Nigerian society, what you call Nigeria today, is a creation of British, European businessmen.
Was it the same thing for other African countries?
Yes.
Because when you say it's an imposition.
Yeah, when you look at the history, go back history, and you hear of the scramble for Africa.
Okay.
The scramble for Africa that led to the Berlin Conference of 1884 was because European countries were fighting against themselves, which part of Africa they would control. So eventually they settled and decided to partition Africa. This partitioning of Africa was not rooted in the free will of the people. So whatever emerged as African countries was something that the British and European, whether Portugal, or those that are under Portugal, those that are under France, those that are under Britain, Germany, and so on. So the coming up of Nigerian society or African states were not because of the willingness of the people. In fact, states have been created before consultations and conferences began to take place on how to grant independence. So even independence itself, the struggle for independence, was a system of a process of agitating against the wrongs created by the imposition of states. So we have not been free from that in the whole of Africa, and for that reason, this coup will continue to happen, or situations that will warrant coup will continue to happen. It is part of the problem of the colonial foundations that created African states.
Now, you know, there are Francophone countries.
Yes.
We were colonized by the British.
By the France.
The
English.
Yeah, English. So most of the African countries were colonized by that. There are some countries colonized by Portugal, Spain, and all of that. There are different views. I mean, these are different countries. there are different issues what you can find in Nigeria, for instance, is the crude, which was the biggest market, so to say. And now in other African countries, it may not be the crude. There are different things. Now, if you look at the development in Africa today, South Africa, for instance, seems to be above board when it comes to development. Does this have anything to do with the presence of the Europeans who can also be called Africans right now? Or does this have everything to do with other parts of the country? Now, I'm not saying that South Africa is more developed. There are issues in South Africa, but they seem to be up there more than other African countries. Can you draw an inference on that?
You have used the nomenclature francophone, anglophone, Portuguese Africa. For me, those are very, very insultive identity.
Really?
They are very, very. How can you call an African francophone, which means French-controlled, French-speaking African countries?
Okay, that's what it means.
Yes, that is what it means. Francophone African countries are those countries that France colonized, and that we are saying, even after independence, the tentacles of the colonial system still remained, and that's what's called neo-colonialism. Yes,
coming there.
Yeah, we have got independence, but we are still being squeezed, being strangled by all the post-colonial structures. And even what you call globalization has not even solved the problem, because the exploitation of African resources, France has no thing that does not come from Africa. Britain does not have anything that does not come from Africa. So Africa has been the one bearing the burden of the world civilization, but at the same time, very, very contradictory is that Africa is suffering in spite of its contribution to global wealth.
How do you, let's talk about...
Even if we talk about South Africa.
Yes.
South Africa was under an apartheid rule for many years. And apartheid means the same thing as colonialism. But this one is that the worst of it was that natives were not given opportunity to take part in politics until recently. You can imagine as recent as Mandela becoming the president of South Africa and so on. Yeah, but if you go to South Africa and many other African countries, the major economic sector are controlled by external sources, by American, British corporations. Now they're even changing it back to corporations.
So are you saying that some of the things we see in South Africa that look somewhat like a level of civilization that seems to be above board?
The German Boers ruled South Africa for years, quarantined the natives into different
suburbs.
Not even suburbs. At the time, they were like closed systems. You don't come out. You have KwaZulu area. You have places that are enclaves, that are where Africans are limited to operate. And those places are still the poorest parts of Africa, of South Africa. So the developed part of South Africa belong to the major mining companies in South Africa belong to the Boers. They just managed to say, okay, instead of these years we have been killing ourselves, you can take rulership. And I hope that we don't mess that rulership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is an interesting concept that I'm trying to wrap my head around. We're talking about the history of coup in Africa, for instance, and then you've been able to buttress this down to the foundation itself, how we began, how democracy was given to us. Now, prior to the coming of the white man, Africa had a mainstay. Africa had a rule over them. Can you take us back a bit before the coming of the white man, the slavery and all of that? How did this alternate to the point where even in 2023, Africa still depends on, is still enslaved mentally particularly to the idea that the white man holds sway over them?
That is the greatest problem of the black man.
How did it get to this point? What exactly happened? What exactly happened to... I'll give you a typical example.
Okay.
When you tell the average African that they are traveling to the UK, Dubai even, they feel elevated. This is in contemporary time. They feel elevated more than you who is here. When you tell an African person, if an African travels from abroad, any of these foreign countries, and comes in, he or she is given an elevated, is seen from an elevated point of view than the person who is here. We've all gone to school. There's no limitation of education here right now. What exactly do you think that makes this superiority cover exist even till this very moment? It's not just about the leaders. I'm just talking about in contemporary times, everyday life.
Let me just give you one music.
Okay.
The music by Bob Marley.
Okay.
Where you say, emancipate yourself from mental slavery.
None but ourselves can free our mind.
The problem is there.
Okay.
That even up to today, as we speak, the mental enslavement is there.
Okay,
and
let's talk about mental enslavement. Now, how did this, is it just about the slavery? Or is there something else we are looking at that makes the African man feel limited in themselves in today's world?
The African man,
yes,
the Negro himself, the Negro proper. You know, there was a movement that was called negritude.
Okay.
The immediate post-colonial
movement.
In fact, those people who really fought for independence also called for negritude.
Okay.
The fact that they have realized then that the black man, the Negro, appears to be to be uncivilized, and I think we should begin to address that matter. Until we address why is the Negro so backward, so greedy, because part of this problem is greed. It is the Europeans who wouldn't have crossed the Atlantic, came to Africa to buy slaves if there were no internal structure that enabled that thing to happen. And I can tell you,
limitation. Can you paint a picture of what that's limitation? Because, you know, for years, a lot of people feel like we look at, you know, in modern time, you talk about the white man, the were slaves. If you look at what's going on in African Americans today, when the George Floyd thing happened, a lot of conversation came up. And one of the things I've always asked myself, they were pulling down structure. This was a slave master. And I remember asking on social media then, if your progenitors, the same your grandparents, that you are not angry about, if they did not sell you to the white man, would the white man have been able to buy them? The answer is no. The answer
is no.
So why do you think that till date, we never want to look inwards? We still see, it's like still, the white man is here, we're still here, taking the crumbs. Accepting the cross. What is going on in the mind of an African to make this still persist till today?
There are many scholars, many African scholars that are still dealing with this matter.
Okay.
I have a professor in my university who has retired, Professor William Kowa.
Okay.
He wrote a book titled How the Tropics Underdeveloped the Negro. The tropic, you know, we're in the tropic.
Yep.
When Jolly, we're in the tropic. How did the tropic underdevelop the Negro? Some other African scholars, like Walter Rodney, they have written books to say how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Other scholars have written how Africans underdeveloped themselves. So this problem has not been solved. European anthropologists presented the African, the Negro, as uncivilized, and that he still need to be brought up following the culture, the knowledge, the skills, the competence created by Europeans. And we appear to be still at that level of evolution. But to even make it worse, in the history of Africa, apart from the slave trade, many African leaders were involved in carrying and cutting away our resources. to Europe. If you read the history of Songhai Empire, somebody called Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa is famous because he carried camels of golds to go to Mecca. And those golds were left in Mecca. A lady called Beersheba, Queen Sheba of Ethiopia, carted our gold, our resources, and traveled all the way to meet King Solomon and left it there. So the looting of African resources didn't start today. So our contemporary leaders, whether it's Sani Abacha, whether it is Idi Amin, Leopold Senghor, whatever they are, including now, are still under that mentality that they should go and save abroad, deprive their people at home. It is happening in Nigeria today. The Omabongo dynasty in Gabon, who have ruled Gabon for 56 years, have been engaged in investing overseas, investing in France, investing in Switzerland, investing in US. You know, the Abacha loot, they are all invested. A lot of these Nigerian politicians have, I don't know if you have known about Panama investigation. So that is to show you that even today, even African clergymen, Pentecostal pastors are part of that scam. Everybody is sending money outside instead of bringing money to develop the homeland. So it's a serious problem. I don't know how to explain it, whether it's psychological or spiritual. I think a pastor,
Matthew
Oshomolo, has a book on it where he tried to paint a scriptural and spiritual dimension to the fact that the African, wherever he is under chain.